To my brother, if you ever feel broken or out of place, know this: even the wildest storms inside you can become your greatest strength. I learned that the day a cougar decided my life needed to change forever. You won't believe how this story ends. It'll move even those with the hardest hearts and prove that sometimes what tries to kill us might also set us free. That morning, the air tasted like cold metal, and the sun rose over the Front Range like an orange bruise swelling across the sky, casting pale light over a land crusted with frost and the gentle hush of a Colorado winter barely loosening its grip. I'd driven up from Denver before dawn, steering my old Subaru through winding roads that felt both familiar and infinite, seeking the silence of pine forests to calm the storm that autism sometimes spins inside my head. There's something about the way snow muffles the world that makes it easier for me to breathe, as if the noise and the colors of people's faces fade away into soft white stillness. The snow that day was crisp and untouched, glinting like ground glass in the morning glow, while my breath streamed in silver ribbons through the chill. My hiking boots crunched over powder as I followed a game trail, inhaling sharp scents of pine needles and the earthy sweetness of thawing soil where sun hit the ground. Birds flickered between branches, sending little showers of frost drifting down like glitter, and each echoing knock of a woodpecker seemed impossibly loud. I felt peaceful, my mind not crowded with words or buzzing static, just the rhythm of footsteps and the deep silence only mountains can hold. I'd brought my camera, hoping to photograph elk or maybe catch a glimpse of a bobcat, my special interest in wildlife guiding me into places most people would consider lonely. The deeper I went into the timber, the more certain I felt that this day was exactly what I needed, the perfect way to clear my head. I didn't know that the woods were keeping secrets that would change the meaning of solitude forever. About 3 miles in, the snow began showing signs of life, as if the forest itself had been trying to whisper warnings in a language I didn't quite understand. And that's when I noticed the first strange pattern of prints winding across the slope in wide, deliberate curves. They were larger than any bobcat tracks I'd seen, spaced wide apart, the front pads rounder, the claws retracted, leaving soft dimples that seemed almost careful in their precision. And I crouched low, running my fingers over the crisp impressions, feeling a pulse of unease slip beneath my skin. The forest grew quieter around me, as though every bird had decided to hold its breath, and even the breeze seemed to pause between the trees, leaving me inside a soundless chamber where each beat of my heart felt amplified and somehow exposed. A faint scent hung in the air, sharp and slightly sweet, like damp fur mixed with coppery hints of blood. And though I couldn't name it then, my instincts flared with electric tension. I scanned the shadows between the ponderosa trunks, convinced I'd glimpsed amber eyes staring back, low to the ground, vanishing the instant I tried to focus. My senses were tangled, fighting between my autistic need for routine and my body's primal warning to leave. Yet curiosity kept dragging me forward, step by step, deeper into snow that swallowed my tracks behind me. The prints curved toward a thicket of chokecherry bushes where the snow was churned and scattered, as though something heavy had been pacing in circles, weighing a decision invisible to human logic. A single tuft of tawny fur clung to a branch, trembling in the breeze, impossibly soft between my gloved fingers, and warm enough that I knew the animal wasn't far. My breath felt caught in my throat, my ears straining for the slightest rustle as the silence pressed tighter against my chest. Despite my gut screaming to turn back, I kept walking, my boots moving like they were driven by someone else, because a part of me believed I could stay safe simply by being quiet enough, small enough, invisible. The terrain sloped downward into a hollow where the sun barely touched the ground, and a fine mist seemed to hang over everything, giving the snow a bluish glow that reminded me of the aquarium tanks I loved as a kid, where predators glided unseen behind glass. I remember thinking how beautiful it all looked, how the branches overhead intertwined like dark lacework, dripping icicles that shattered into diamonds when they fell. But there was also a pressure building in my chest, a sense that the forest was somehow leaning closer, watching me with eyes I couldn't locate. I felt my thoughts start to spin in loops, repeating fragments of the same sentence, "This is fine, I'm fine, I'm fine," while my hands flexed and unflexed around the strap of my camera. I began to hear something then, a low scrape, like fur brushing across bark, rhythmic and purposeful, and my skin prickled all over with the certainty that I was no longer alone. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong to wind or falling snow, but to muscle sliding over bone, to claws finding purchase in wood. My heart thudded so hard I could barely breathe, and I stood frozen, half-crouched, scanning the undergrowth until my eyes watered. And then, from between two spruce trunks, a shape flowed into view, silent and sinuous, as if the shadows themselves had come alive to claim me. I saw its head first, smooth and broad, the fur pale tawny with faint darker freckles over its snout, and eyes so round and gold they seemed to glow from within, fixing me with a gaze that was neither curious nor cruel, only entirely certain of itself. Its whiskers twitched as it scented the air, the big pink nose glistening with tiny ice crystals, and I realized it wasn't afraid of me, not even slightly, as though it had already decided exactly what I was worth. The cougar moved forward one deliberate step at a time, shoulders rolling like liquid, each massive paw landing silently despite its weight, and its tail curled and uncurled behind it like a question mark. I heard myself whimper, a small animal sound I'd never made before, and my body seemed to lock in place, arms hanging uselessly at my sides while my brain screamed at me to run. The cat's ears flicked, angled toward me as it tilted its head, studying me like a puzzle, and in that moment I felt as though it could see everything inside me, every anxiety, every fear, every secret that had ever set me apart from other people. My breath came in sharp, tiny gulps, fogging the air between us, and the silence felt impossibly heavy, pressing down until the only sound was my own pulse hammering in my ears. For a moment, I thought the cougar might simply watch me and vanish again, but then it lowered its head and tensed its shoulders, gathering itself into a shape I knew meant violence. I barely managed to take one step back before it exploded forward, a tan blur ripping through snow and shadows, aiming straight for my chest. Pergentaro ChatGPT, the moment the cougar struck, time broke apart into flickering snapshots, as though someone was clicking a camera shutter inside my skull, capturing fragments of fur, teeth, and snow exploding around me in a white halo. I felt the weight first, an impossible crushing force slamming into my chest, driving me backward so hard that my boots left the ground and my breath punched out of my lungs in a high, choking gasp. Claws raked across my jacket, sharp as broken glass, catching fabric and skin underneath so quickly I couldn't even process the pain yet, only the wet warmth flooding my ribs. The cougar's face was inches from mine, its pupils black as spilled ink, and each exhale from its nostrils blasted hot, moist bursts that smelled like meat and old copper pennies. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a strangled yelp, and my hands flailed uselessly against fur so dense and sleek it felt like wet velvet beneath my palms. Its jaws gaped, revealing teeth that looked yellowed and ancient, built for crushing bone rather than simply tearing flesh, and I remember focusing stupidly on a small nick in one of its canines as it lunged closer. Snow sprayed around us, glittering in the shafts of light, as though the entire forest had erupted in silent chaos, while the cougar's forelegs pinned me with terrifying precision. My senses were tangled in a hurricane of sights and sounds, the rasp of the cat's tongue as it grazed my cheek, the deep, thudding growl vibrating through its chest into my own bones, the flash of its tail slashing behind it. My mind screamed at me to fight, to move, to do anything, but my body felt numb and distant, my thoughts looping in a dizzy spiral of disbelief. I remember thinking, in a voice that sounded eerily calm, This is how animals die. A savage pain exploded across my left arm as the cougar clamped its jaws around my forearm, and the world turned bright white for a second, as if lightning had detonated behind my eyes, making me gag on my own breath. The teeth crushed muscle and tendon with horrifying finality. The pressure so intense that I didn't even feel cutting so much as an overwhelming sense of bones grinding, splintering, as though my arm were a piece of dry wood snapped over a knee. Hot blood pumped between its teeth, splattering in bright arcs onto the snow and steaming in the cold, filling the air with a smell so thick and metallic that I thought I might choke on it. The cougar's whiskers quivered as it chewed, adjusting its grip in small, precise bites, and I screamed, a raw, broken sound that felt ripped straight from somewhere deep inside me, echoing off the trees with a desperate sharpness. Every instinct in me ignited, animal panic surging through my chest, and I punched at its head with my free hand, striking hard bone under soft fur, feeling the vibrations travel up my arm like hitting a rock. It flinched, but didn't let go, its ears flattening against its skull as its eyes locked onto mine, pupils narrowing into deadly slits. And I could see my own reflection in those golden pools, wild, blood-streaked, a creature fighting for its life. My throat burned with ragged gasps, my body twisting violently beneath the cat's weight, snow melting under us into a pink slurry as my blood soaked into the ground. The cougar's tail lashed side to side, swatting branches, sending snow cascading down, as though the forest itself was shaking loose in alarm. I felt my strength ebbing fast, cold creeping into my fingers, a sickening weakness flooding my legs as pain began to overload every nerve. Still, I kept fighting, driven by pure terror, the knowledge that if I stopped, it would kill me without hesitation. Suddenly, the cougar wrenched its head sideways, ripping another chunk of flesh from my arm, and my scream split into two sharp syllables, echoing so loudly that birds burst from the trees in a frenzied rustle of wings. I remember thinking how surreal it was that the sky above was so beautiful, flawless blue, sunlight slanting through snowflakes swirling like glitter, while my own blood steamed on the ice below, thick and dark as spilled paint. It felt as though I'd stepped outside myself, floating above the scene, watching a man in a red jacket writhing beneath a huge cat, a silent movie where no one could hear him screaming. I tried to curl into a ball to protect my stomach, but the cougar's paws slammed me flat again, claws hooking into my jacket and dragging me sideways across the snow with shocking strength. My camera bag, half open, spilled batteries and memory cards onto the white ground, scattering like tiny black seeds while my vision blurred around the edges. Every breath came out in ragged sobs, my throat raw, my chest burning as I gulped air that tasted like blood and pine resin. The cat's growl rose into a deep, resonant snarl that vibrated inside my ribcage, so deep I felt it rather than heard it, like thunder rolling through stone. My free hand scrabbled for anything, a stick, a rock, my dropped camera, but my fingers felt slippery and weak, coated in my own blood. I could feel warm liquid soaking my layers of clothing, trickling over my side in rhythmic pulses, and knew that meant an artery might be open. For the first time, a certainty crystallized in my mind, chilling and absolute. I might die out here, alone. I caught sight of movement behind the cougar, a sudden black blur low to the ground, and then my dog, Nico, came crashing out of the brush with a sound I'd never heard from him before, a vicious, savage roar that barely sounded canine. Nico's fur was bristled so high he looked twice his usual size, his eyes wide and white-rimmed with panic, yet full of a ferocity I'd never imagined from my gentle companion who normally whimpered at thunderstorms. He slammed into the cougar's flank with enough force to knock the big cat sideways, and for a fraction of a second, the cougar let go of my arm, spinning to face this new threat with its lips peeled back in a dripping crimson snarl. I saw the two animals collide in a flurry of fur and fangs, Nico lunging for the cat's throat while the cougar lashed at him with claws that glittered like knives in the sunlight, each swipe tearing tufts of black fur and spraying more blood across the snow. The cougar roared, a deep, echoing sound that seemed to shake the very air, and Nico yelped but refused to retreat, dancing around the cat with relentless, frantic aggression. I pushed myself upright on my good arm, trembling, vision tunneling as spots of light flickered in front of my eyes, barely able to process that Nico was saving my life at the cost of his own flesh. The cougar pivoted, slamming Nico down into the snow, pinning him briefly while its jaws snapped dangerously close to his throat, and my heart seemed to shatter inside my chest. Rage surged up in me like wildfire, blinding and absolute. And I crawled closer, gripping a fallen branch slick with ice, determined to do something. With a burst of terrified strength, I swung the branch like a club, striking the cougar across its muzzle so hard that a crack echoed through the clearing, sharp as a rifle shot, making snow fall from the branches in trembling curtains. The cougar recoiled, stunned, its lips peeling back over bloody teeth as it shook its head violently, spraying droplets of blood and froth in all directions. Nico scrabbled free, stumbling backward on trembling legs, one ear torn and hanging in a ragged flap, blood streaming down his neck as he let out a strangled whine. My pulse was roaring in my ears, each heartbeat a cannon blast, my vision narrowing so drastically that the world shrank to a tunnel in which only the cougar existed. I staggered to my feet, brandishing the stick with both hands. Even though my left arm hung useless and leaking blood, pain screaming through my nerves like white fire. The cougar hesitated, tail lashing, its eyes locked on me as though weighing the cost of finishing what it started. And for a terrifying moment, I believed it would come at me again. But then it drew back a single step, ears flattened, blood dripping from its muzzle onto the snow like drops of red paint splattering white canvas. I screamed at it, an incoherent primal bellow that shocked even me, and the cougar blinked once, twice, then turned and vanished into the trees with a silent, fluid grace, leaving me and Nico standing in a swirling snowfall of silence and blood. My knees gave out, and I collapsed into the snow beside my dog, clutching him to my chest as the world tilted sideways, blackness closing in around the edges of my vision like curtains being drawn on the stage. And the last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the steam rising from Nico's torn fur, blending with the breathless hush of the winter forest. I woke up in the hospital under harsh white lights, blinking as sharp pain pulsed through my arm and ribs, and for a few seconds I thought the cougar was still on top of me. My throat felt raw, as if I'd been screaming for hours, and every beep of the machines beside my bed made me jump like gunshots. The bandages around my arm were thick as a cast, stiff with dried blood that smelled sharp and metallic. A nurse leaned over me, her voice gentle but distant, explaining surgeries and blood loss, as if I could understand words through the fog in my brain. My brother was there too, eyes red and swollen, gripping my good hand so tightly that it hurt. And he kept saying, "You're okay, you're safe," over and over. The ceiling tiles blurred as tears filled my eyes, because I wasn't sure I believed him, not yet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw golden eyes, a mouth full of teeth, and snow exploding around me. My heartbeat seemed to rattle the hospital bed, thumping so hard it hurt my chest, and I kept checking the corners of the room, half expecting the cougar to slip through the shadows. I felt like part of me was still lying in the snow, waiting for teeth to sink into my throat. The days in the hospital blurred into one endless stretch of white walls and stinging antiseptic, each hour measured by painkillers and whispered conversations. My arm throbbed beneath layers of gauze, sending lightning bolts of pain shooting through my shoulder and neck. Nurses spoke gently, moving around me like I might shatter, but sometimes even their soft voices felt like claws scraping my skull. I'd wake screaming, convinced I was pinned under the cougar's weight again, tasting blood and snow in my mouth. My brother tried reading to calm me down, his voice trembling as he stumbled over wildlife facts I used to love. But all those facts meant nothing now, because I'd felt how real those jaws were, how quickly nature could decide I didn't belong. The doctors explained the damage, using words like nerve injury and possible reconstruction, but it all washed over me like rain on stone. Sometimes I stared at my bandaged arm and wondered if it still belonged to me at all. It felt like I'd lost more than skin and muscle, that something inside me had been carved away too. And every time Nico came to mind, I felt guilt so heavy it nearly crushed my chest. When they finally let me leave, the outside world felt too big, the colors too sharp, the sounds slicing into me like glass. Snow had melted in Denver, leaving grey slush in the gutters, and everything smelled of wet concrete and exhaust, instead of pine and cold. Riding home in my brother's car, I kept scanning every tree we passed, certain I'd see amber eyes glowing between the branches. My apartment felt unfamiliar, smaller somehow, the corners darker and full of invisible things. I checked every window lock 3 times, convinced the cougar might slip inside if I didn't. At night, sleep was like falling into quicksand, my dreams thick with claws, growls, and a sense of weight crushing my chest. Sometimes I woke sobbing, gasping Nico's name, afraid he'd died saving me. Even the soft rustle of my curtains sent adrenaline flooding through my veins. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in around me, thick with silence that pressed against my ears. The cougar might have vanished, but it felt like it still prowled somewhere inside my skull. Physical therapy became my new battlefield, each session full of searing pain and frustration as I tried to move fingers that felt made of stone. The therapists were kind but firm, gently urging me to keep trying, though sweat dripped down my back with every tiny motion. I watched my reflection in the therapy room mirror, a pale, hollow-eyed man who barely resembled the person I used to be. My arm was mapped with scars, red and puckered, reminders of how close I'd come to dying. Strangers stared when I ventured outside with my sling, eyes lingering on my bandages like I was a curiosity. Friends texted kind messages, but I couldn't find words to answer because everything I wanted to say felt too big or too dark. I started avoiding calls, letting my phone vibrate unanswered on the table while I stared into space. Food tasted like cardboard, laughter felt out of place, and the world seemed drained of color. I'd never felt so tired, like my bones were filled with lead. And sometimes I wondered if the cougar had taken part of my soul, along with the flesh from my arm. But amid the fear, a question gnawed at me, circling my mind late at night when the world was silent. Why had the cougar stopped? Why hadn't it finished me off when it easily could have? The thought haunted me, as though the animal had spared me on purpose, leaving me half alive for reasons I couldn't understand. I'd read about predators deciding their prey wasn't worth the risk, but something about the cougar's eyes stayed with me, like it saw deeper into me than any human ever had. Sometimes I imagined it still out there, following my scent through snowdrifts, choosing to watch instead of strike. Part of me felt tethered to it now, bound by claws and blood in a way I couldn't sever. Even as terror crawled under my skin, there was a strange respect coiling inside me too. I wondered if the cougar had sensed my turmoil, my restless mind always spinning, and decided to let me go. And though I trembled every time I pictured its teeth, I felt an unexpected gratitude burning beneath my scars. Because somehow, in that brutal moment, it had forced me to choose life over fear. Life after the attack became a constant balancing act between fear and determination. Every day a choice to keep stepping forward even when shadows loomed large behind my eyes. I started taking Nico on slow walks through city parks, gripping his leash tight while my eyes darted across every patch of brush. Trees used to feel comforting, but now even the rustle of leaves made my heart slam into my ribs. Yet slowly, a stubborn part of me refused to stay trapped inside my apartment forever. Each small victory, getting dressed alone, holding a coffee cup without spilling, felt monumental, like I was stealing pieces of my life back from the cougar's claws. I began attending therapy sessions, not just for my arm, but for my mind, learning to breathe through the flashbacks instead of drowning in them. Sometimes I shared pieces of the attack with my therapist, words shaking out of me like dry leaves falling. She listened without flinching, as though she understood monsters could be real even when they wore fur. My brother stayed close, hovering protectively, but giving me space when I asked. And through it all, Nico never left my side, his warm weight against my legs reminding me I wasn't fighting this alone. Months passed, and scars on my arm faded from angry red to pale silver, each line a story written into my flesh that strangers couldn't decipher. I finally gathered enough courage to drive back into the foothills one afternoon, needing to face the place that nearly killed me. Snow still clung in shady patches, and pine needles carpeted the trails where my boots crunched softly, each step echoing in the crisp air. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, sweat slicking my palms despite the cold, but I kept going because I couldn't stand the thought of letting that cougar own the rest of my life. When I stepped out of the car, the forest smelled sharp and clean, full of resin and wind, and for the first time in months, I felt my lungs fill all the way. The trees stood silent and immense, shadows pooling beneath them, and I realized the forest hadn't betrayed me. It had only revealed how wild the world could truly be. A woodpecker hammered high above, startling me so badly my knees buckled, but I stayed standing. I closed my eyes, listening to the hush of branches moving like whispers, and I realized I wanted to keep coming back, even if it scared me. One afternoon in late spring, I decided to follow a small trail that twisted away from the main path, Nico trotting ahead, ears perked and tail wagging gently. The sun dappled the ground in shifting patches of gold, and wildflowers pushed up through last year's dead leaves, bright colors defiant against the soil. Each step felt like peeling back layers of fear, though my pulse still skittered at every sudden sound. At one bend in the trail, I froze because a set of prints crossed the soft earth, round, silent, unmistakable. My breath caught, a single thin thread of sound in the quiet. The tracks weren't fresh, maybe a day or two old, but they were clear as writing on paper. My chest clenched so hard I thought I might vomit, but I didn't turn back. Instead, I knelt and touched the edge of one paw print, my fingers trembling as they traced the shape. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but mixed with it was something else: curiosity, respect, even wonder. The fear was still there, a living thing coiled in my stomach, but it no longer ruled me entirely. I stood and kept walking, Nico glancing back as if to ask if I was sure, and I nodded, because somehow I was. Sometimes at night, I dream I'm back in the snow, the cougar's golden eyes watching me through branches dusted white, its breath curling in cold clouds. In those dreams, it doesn't attack me. It simply studies me, calm and silent, as if measuring the shape of my soul. I wake shaking, sweat cooling on my skin, but not always afraid anymore. The dreams have shifted from pure terror to something more complicated, layered with questions I can't quite answer. Part of me wonders if the cougar sensed my differences that day in the woods, recognized some quiet wildness inside me. There's a strange comfort in believing we shared a moment of recognition, predator to prey, to creature. The scars on my arm remind me daily of the price I paid for that encounter, but they also remind me that I'm still here, breathing, choosing to keep going, and I've learned that survival isn't only about escaping teeth and claws. It's about facing the wilderness inside yourself, about deciding that fear won't be the final word in your story. A year has passed, and the man I was before the attack feels like someone else entirely, a ghost who loved the quiet of the forest without understanding its teeth. My body still carries pain that flares up without warning, and some days my arm feels heavy as stone, fingers stiff and clumsy. But other days, I feel strength in the way my muscles knit themselves back together, in the stubbornness that kept me alive. I've started volunteering with wildlife groups, speaking to others about staying safe in the backcountry, my voice shaking sometimes, but growing steadier each time. People listen closely when I show them my scars, as though they're looking at proof that nature can be both beautiful and merciless. I've even picked up my camera again, though my pictures now capture the world with a sharper eye, aware of how close life and death can sit together. My brother says he's proud of me, though sometimes I see the worry lingering in his eyes. And Nico, his fur thicker where the scars have healed, still curls against my side at night, the steady thump of his tail, a soft drumbeat that anchors me here, alive. That day, the cougar didn't just leave scars on my body, it carved a truth into my soul, that inside the quietest forest and inside myself, there will always be wild things waiting in the shadows. But I'm no longer running from them. I've learned to look them in the eyes,